The scream came from the nursery, and Wren was already running before she understood why. She had heard many sounds in the Alpha King's castle over the past 2 years. She had heard laughter, arguments, the soft cries of newborn pups, and the low growl of guards changing shifts in the corridors. But this sound was different. It was not a cry of hunger or fear of the dark. It was the sound a small child makes when something truly dangerous is standing in front of them. Her feet slapped against the cold stone floor as she rounded the corner near the west tower. The candles along the wall flickered, as if the air itself had grown restless. Somewhere far below, music still drifted up from the great hall, where the founding feast filled the castle with warmth and wine and dancing. Nobody down there could hear what was happening up here. Nobody but her. Wren reached the nursery door and threw it open. The twins, Elias and Nora, were pressed into the corner of the room, their small bodies shaking. The window that overlooked the eastern garden stood wide open, and the curtains snapped wildly in the night wind. A figure stood near the window, tall and cloaked, its eyes catching the candlelight in a way that made her stomach twist. She did not scream. She did not run. She stepped between the stranger and the children, spreading her arms as if she alone could become a wall. "Get away from them," she said. Her voice did not shake, though her hands did. The stranger tilted his head, studying her the way a wolf studies something it has decided is not yet worth its time. "You are only a servant girl," he said. "Step aside, and you will not be harmed." "I said get away from them." He moved fast, faster than she expected. She barely had time to grab the iron poker resting beside the cold fireplace before he was on her, and the room filled with the sound of a struggle that should never have happened in a place meant for lullabies and soft blankets. 2 floors below, Luna Seraphine spun across the dance floor, in a gown the color of crushed rubies, laughing at something a nobleman had said, her golden hair catching the light of 100 candles. She was the picture of a Luna that every pack dreamed of having, beautiful and admired, the kind of woman whose presence made a room feel important. She did not know, could not know, that upstairs a servant girl she barely acknowledged was standing between her children and a danger that had slipped past every guard in the castle. Nobody had asked Seraphine to watch the twins that night. She had not offered. It had simply been understood, the way it was always understood, that someone else would handle it, someone quieter, someone whose name people forgot to say. That someone was currently bleeding from a shallow cut along her forearm, gripping a fire poker with white knuckles, refusing to move an inch from where Elias and Nora huddled behind her. "You should not fight," the stranger said, almost with amusement, circling her slowly. "You will lose." "Then I will lose standing here," Wren said. "Not one step back." Something strange happened inside her chest as she said those words. A heat she did not recognize, spreading from somewhere deep and unfamiliar, as though a door she never knew existed had cracked open just slightly. She had always been told she was ordinary, plain, unremarkable. A girl good for carrying trays and minding children, nothing more. But in this moment, with 2 small lives behind her and a stranger's eyes fixed on her like she was prey, she did not feel ordinary at all. The stranger lunged again, and this time Wren did not simply block him. She struck first. The poker connected with his shoulder, and he staggered back with a hiss of surprise. For a heartbeat, his composed expression cracked, replaced by something closer to genuine shock. He had expected an easy target. He had not expected resistance. "Interesting," he murmured, rolling his shoulder, testing the ache. "Perhaps you are not as ordinary as you look." Behind her, Nora whimpered, and Elias tried to be brave in the way small children try to be brave, standing slightly in front of his sister even though he trembled from head to toe. Wren's heart clenched at the sight. These were not her children by blood, but she had rocked them to sleep more nights than their own mother had. She had wiped their tears, sung to them in the dark, and watched them take their first shaky steps. She would not let a stranger take them from this room. "Whatever you came for," Wren said, forcing steadiness into her voice, "you will not have it." The stranger's eyes flicked toward the open window, then back to her, calculating. Somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard shouting, faint and far away, swallowed by the noise of the feast below. Help was not coming quickly enough. She understood that with sudden, sharp clarity. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would be decided by her, and her alone. He came at her again, and this time there was no hesitation in his movement, no testing, only intent. Ren swung the poker with everything she had, but he caught her wrist before it connected, twisting hard enough that she cried out, and the weapon clattered to the floor. For one terrible second, she thought it was over. Then, instinct took over where strength had failed. She drove her knee upward, catching him off guard, and used the moment of surprise to wrench free and shove him backward with a strength that startled even her. He stumbled into the small writing desk near the wall, sending a stack of books crashing to the floor. "Run to the corner," she gasped to the twins, without turning her head, without giving the stranger even a fraction of an opening. "Stay low, stay quiet." Elias grabbed his sister's hand and pulled her further into the shadowed corner of the room, both of them crouching behind an overturned chair Ren had shoved into place earlier, back when she'd first sensed something was wrong in the halls tonight, back when she couldn't explain the prickling unease crawling up the back of her neck. She had felt it before the scream. That was the part she would think about later, when there was time to think about anything at all. A restlessness in her blood, an awareness that something was circling closer, long before any danger revealed itself. She had dismissed it as nerves. She would not make that mistake again. The stranger recovered his footing and turned on her, no longer amused, no longer curious. Now there was only cold purpose in his eyes. "You are wasting both our time," he said. "The children come with me tonight. That was the arrangement." "Whose arrangement?" Ren demanded, though some distant part of her mind understood this was not the moment for questions. He did not answer. He simply attacked again, and this time she barely got her arms up in time to deflect the blow aimed at her ribs. Pain exploded through her side, sharp and breathless, but she refused to fold. She grabbed a fallen book from the floor and hurled it at his face, buying herself half a second, enough time to snatch up the poker again. The fight that followed was not graceful. It was not the kind of battle sung about in old pack stories, full of noble strikes and clean victories. It was desperate and messy, both of them bleeding, both of them breathing hard, the nursery around them growing more wrecked with every passing second. A shelf toppled, a vase shattered. Somewhere in the chaos, Ren's shoulder slammed against the wall hard enough to leave stars dancing in her vision. But she did not stop. Every time she thought she had nothing left, she looked past the stranger's shoulder to where Elias and Nora crouched in the corner, eyes wide with terror, and she found something more inside her, some reserve she had never needed to use before tonight. "Please," Nora whispered, so quietly, Ren almost missed it over the sound of her own ragged breathing. "Please don't let him take us." That single, small plea did something to Ren that no amount of courage could have accomplished alone. It burned away every ounce of fear left in her body, and replaced it with something fiercer, something that felt less like her own will, and more like an instinct rising from somewhere ancient and unshaken. She struck the stranger across the temple with the poker, harder than she had struck him yet, and he went down hard, his head connecting with the edge of the writing desk. For a moment, he did not move. Ren stood over him, chest heaving, blood trickling from a cut above her eyebrow, her arms trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. She did not lower the poker. She had learned enough in the last few minutes to know better than to assume a threat was finished simply because it had gone quiet. "Stay behind me," she told the twins, her voice hoarse but steady. "Just a little longer." Downstairs, the music swelled as the feast reached its liveliest hour. Luna Seraphine twirled beneath the chandeliers, unaware that 2 floors above her, the fate of her own children had come down to the courage of a servant girl nobody at that party had bothered to remember existed. The stranger stirred, groaning, and Ren tightened her grip on the poker, ready to strike again if she had to. Her side burned with pain from the earlier blow, her vision blurred at the edges, but she planted her feet and did not move. Not one step back. She had promised herself that, and she intended to keep the promise, even if it was the last thing she ever did. Outside, in the corridor beyond the nursery door, footsteps began to pound against the stone, fast and urgent, growing louder with every second. Whether they belonged to friend or another enemy, Ren could not yet tell. She only knew that whoever was coming would find her exactly where she said she would be. Standing between danger and the children she had sworn, without ever saying the words aloud, to protect with everything she had. The footsteps outside the nursery door grew louder, and Ren's grip on the poker tightened until her knuckles turned white. She had no way of knowing if they belonged to a guard or to another intruder, and in that uncertainty, Every second stretched painfully long. The door burst open, and Corwin, the king's second in command, filled the frame with his massive shoulders and a blade already drawn. His eyes swept the wrecked nursery, taking in the shattered vase, the overturned desk, the stranger groaning on the floor, and finally Ren, bloodied but upright, standing guard over the twins like a soldier who refused to surrender her post. "By the moon," Corwin breathed. "What happened here?" "He came through the window," Ren said, her voice shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. "He wanted the pups. I stopped him." Corwin moved quickly, kneeling beside the fallen stranger and pressing a knee to his back to keep him still, even as the man groaned and stirred weakly. More guards poured into the room behind him, drawn by the commotion, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion as they took in the scene. "Someone breached the eastern wall during the feast," one of the guards said, breathless from running. "We only just noticed the wards flickering." Whoever planned this knew exactly when everyone would be distracted. Ren's legs finally gave out, not from fear, but from sheer exhaustion, and she sank to the floor beside the twins, pulling them both into her arms. Elias buried his face against her shoulder, and Nora clung to her sleeve with small, trembling fingers. "You're safe now," Ren whispered to them, over and over, though her own voice cracked with the effort of staying calm. "You're safe. I've got you." Corwin studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "You fought him alone." "There was no one else," Ren said simply, "so I did what I could." Word of the attack spread through the castle faster than the guards could contain it, slipping from servant to servant, from guard to guard, until it reached the great hall, where the feast was still in full, glittering swing. The music did not stop immediately. It took several long moments before the first ripple of unease passed through the dancers, before Alpha King Draven, who had been standing near the head table speaking with a visiting pack leader, felt something shift deep in his chest. It was not a sound that reached him first. It was a feeling, sharp and unmistakable, a thread of fear tugging at something buried deep inside him, something he had never fully understood, but had always trusted without question. His pups were afraid. He knew it the way he knew his own heartbeat, an awareness that came from blood and bond rather than any word spoken aloud. He set down his goblet without excusing himself and crossed the hall in long, urgent strides, ignoring the guests who called out to him, ignoring the music that faltered as more people noticed his sudden departure. Luna Seraphine, mid-laugh at something a noblewoman had said, turned to see him leaving and frowned, confused by the abrupt shift in his demeanor. "Draven?" she called after him, but he did not slow down, did not turn back. Whatever had gripped him was pulling him forward with a force she could not compete with, not even on a night meant to celebrate her. By the time Draven reached the nursery, guards lined the corridor outside, and the door stood open, revealing a scene that stopped him cold. The room was in ruins. Broken glass littered the floor. A stranger, restrained and bleeding, sat against the wall under Corwin's watchful eye. And in the middle of it all, sitting on the floor with her arms wrapped tightly around his children, was a servant girl he barely recognized, her face streaked with blood and dust, her eyes fierce even in exhaustion. "Elias, Nora." Draven's voice broke as he crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside them. His pups turned toward him immediately, releasing their grip on Ren just long enough to throw themselves into their father's arms. "Papa," Nora sobbed, and Draven held both children close, his hands trembling as he checked them for injuries, running his palms over their small shoulders and arms, as though he could not quite believe they were whole and breathing. "We're okay," Elias said, though his voice wavered. "Ren protected us. She fought the bad man all by herself." Draven's gaze lifted from his son to the young woman still sitting on the floor a few feet away, watching the reunion with quiet relief written across her exhausted face. For the first time since entering the room, he truly looked at her, not as a servant passing through the castle halls, not as a face he vaguely recognized from the kitchens or the nursery, but as the person who had stood between his children and a threat that could have taken everything from him. "You fought him," Draven said slowly, as though testing the words. "Alone." "There wasn't time to find anyone else," Ren said, wincing as she shifted her weight, the cut along her side making itself known now that the danger had passed and adrenaline was beginning to fade. "I couldn't leave them. I wouldn't leave them." Draven rose, still holding both his children, and moved closer to her, close enough that something shifted in the air between them, a strange and sudden awareness that neither of them could name. He caught her scent for the first time, really caught it, beneath the blood and the smoke and the fear, something warm and clean that struck him with a force he was entirely unprepared for. His breath caught. His wolf, usually a quiet presence beneath the surface of his thoughts, surged forward, with an intensity that nearly knocked him off balance. "Mate," it said, the single word echoing through him with absolute certainty. Draven blinked, momentarily disoriented, staring at Ren, as though seeing her for the very first time, though he had passed her in the halls 100 times before without a second glance. She stared back at him, confused by the sudden shift in his expression, unaware of the storm that had just begun inside him. "Your Grace?" she asked hesitantly, glancing down at herself, as if wondering whether he was staring at her injuries or her disheveled state. "Is something wrong?" Draven opened his mouth, then closed it again, unsure of how to explain what he had just felt, unsure if this was even the moment to speak of it at all. His children were shaken. The castle had just been breached. A prisoner sat bound in the corner of the ruined nursery, waiting to be questioned. This was not the time. And yet the bond had already taken root, undeniable and irreversible, humming beneath his skin like a second heartbeat. "Nothing," he said finally, his voice rougher than he intended. "You need a healer, now." Ren opened her mouth to protest, to insist the twins mattered more than her own scrapes, but Draven was already lifting his hand, signaling for one of the guards to fetch help, his expression leaving no room for argument. Behind him, in the doorway, Luna Seraphine finally arrived, breathless from running, her ruby gown rumpled from the pace she had set through the corridors. She took in the wrecked nursery, the bound stranger, her children clinging to their father, and the servant girl sitting bloodied on the floor, and something cold and unreadable settled over her features. "What," she said slowly, "is going on here?" No one answered her right away. And in the silence that followed, Ren felt Draven's gaze return to her once more, lingering a beat too long, carrying a weight she did not yet understand, but somehow already felt in the depths of her exhausted, aching bones. Seraphine's question hung in the air, sharp and demanding, but Draven did not answer immediately. His attention remained fixed on Ren, on the healer who had just arrived and knelt beside her to examine the cut along her ribs, on the way his children still glanced toward the servant girl every few seconds, as though needing to confirm she was truly still there, still safe. "There was an attack," Corwin said, stepping forward to fill the silence his alpha could not seem to break. "Someone breached the eastern wall during the feast. He came for the pups." Seraphine's eyes widened, and for a moment, genuine fear flickered across her face as she looked toward Elias and Nora. She moved toward them quickly, kneeling to check them over the way any mother would, and Draven watched her do it, some old habit of trust still present despite the strange new awareness humming through his blood. "Are you hurt?" Seraphine asked the twins, her voice softer now, stripped of its earlier sharpness. "We're okay," Elias said again, though he did not lean into his mother's arms the way he had leaned into his father's. "Ren saved us." Seraphine's gaze finally settled on Ren, taking in the blood on her sleeve, the bruise forming along her jaw, the exhaustion carved into every line of her posture. Something complicated passed behind the Luna's eyes, gratitude and confusion tangled together with something else Ren could not quite identify. "You fought off an intruder," Seraphine said slowly. "Alone, with no training." "I did what needed to be done," Ren answered, too tired to soften the words into something more polished. The healer pressed a cloth against her side, and she winced, biting back a sharper reaction. Draven's jaw tightened as he watched the healer work, as though every wince of pain Ren tried to hide sent a jolt through his own body. He crouched beside her, ignoring the way Corwin and the guards exchanged glances at the unusual attention their alpha was paying to a servant. "Where else are you hurt?" Draven asked, his voice low, meant only for her. "It's nothing, Your Grace," Ren said, though the tightness in her voice betrayed the lie. "It is not nothing," he said, firmer this time. "You bled for my children tonight. The least I can do is make sure you are properly cared for." Seraphine's eyes narrowed slightly at the exchange, though she said nothing yet. her attention pulled back to the bound stranger sitting against the wall, still barely conscious from the blow Ren had landed earlier. "Who is he?" she asked instead, straightening. "Does anyone know who sent him?" "Not yet," Corwin said. "He'll be questioned once the healers are finished with him. Whoever planned this knew the feast would leave the castle vulnerable. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from outside our walls easily." A heavy silence fell over the room at that implication. If the attacker had known exactly when the wards would be weakest, exactly when the guards would be distracted, then someone close to the pack, someone with access to sensitive information, may have played a part in tonight's near disaster. Draven's gaze swept the room, cataloging every face present, though his thoughts remained tangled around the strange, undeniable pull he felt toward the woman kneeling in front of the healer. He had ruled his pack for nearly 6 years without once encountering the bond his own father had described to him as a young man. The certainty of it, the way it settled into a person's chest like it had always belonged there. He had begun to believe, quietly, privately, that perhaps it simply was not meant for him. That his mating to Seraphine, arranged through pack alliances years ago, was simply how his story would go. Tonight had shattered that belief, in the space of a single breath. "Your Grace," the healer said, rising to her feet, after finishing her examination of Ren's injuries. "The cuts are shallow. Though the bruising along her ribs will need time to heal, she should rest, and avoid any strain for the next several days. See that she has whatever she needs," Draven said immediately. "A private room, proper meals, nothing is to be spared." Seraphine's eyebrows lifted at the instruction, surprise flickering across her expression, before she carefully smoothed it away. "That seems generous for a servant's injuries." "She saved our children's lives," Draven said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I would think you, of all people, would understand the weight of that." The words landed harder than he perhaps intended, and Seraphine's lips pressed into a thin line, though she did not argue further. Not in front of the guards, not in front of the twins, who were watching the exchange with wide, uncertain eyes. Ren, still seated on the floor, felt increasingly uncomfortable being the center of such attention, especially attention exchanged between the king and his Luna, in tones that carried more history than she understood. She shifted, attempting to rise despite the ache in her side. "I don't need special treatment," she said quietly. "I only did what anyone would have done." "No," Draven said, and something in his voice made her go still. "Not anyone would have done what you did tonight. Most would have run for help and left the outcome to chance. You stayed, you fought, that is not something to be dismissed." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the noise of the room seemed to fade around them, the guards and the bound prisoner, and even Seraphine's watchful presence blurring into something distant and unimportant. Ren felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, unfamiliar and disorienting, and she quickly looked away, attributing it to exhaustion and the lingering shock of the fight. She did not yet understand what Draven had already realized in the nursery, the truth his wolf had recognized the instant her scent reached him. She only knew that something about the way the Alpha King looked at her made her feel, for the first time in longer than she could remember, truly seen. Corwin cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "Your Grace, the prisoner is stirring. We should move him to the lower cells for questioning, before the pack elders arrive demanding answers." Draven nodded, forcing his attention back to the more urgent matters at hand, though something in him resisted the pull away from Ren, as though leaving her side now, even for necessary duties, felt wrong, in a way he could not fully articulate. "Take him below," Draven instructed. "I want to know who sent him before the sun rises." As the guards hauled the still groggy stranger from the room, Draven turned back toward Ren, one final time, before duty called him away entirely. "Rest," he told her. "We will speak again soon." It was not a request. And as he left the ruined nursery with Corwin at his side, Seraphine remained behind for a moment, watching Ren with an expression that had shifted from confusion into something colder, something calculating, as the first threads of suspicion began weaving themselves into her thoughts. Whatever had just happened in this room, Seraphine intended to understand it fully, and soon. The prisoner refused to speak for the first hour of questioning, sitting in the dim cell beneath the castle with his arms bound and his eyes fixed on the stone floor. Corwin paced in front of him, patience thinning with every passing minute, while Draven stood near the doorway, arms crossed, his mind only partly present in the room. The other part of him was still upstairs, in the healer's quarters, where Ren was resting after finally allowing someone to properly tend her wounds. He had not intended to think of her so often. He had duties, a breached wall to explain, a prisoner to break, a pact to reassure before panic spread through the corridors like wildfire. And yet every few minutes, his thoughts drifted back to her, to the steadiness in her voice when she said not one step back, to the way his wolf had gone utterly silent, and utterly certain, the moment her scent reached him. "He's not going to talk easily," Corwin said, finally giving up on the direct approach and stepping back from the prisoner. "Whoever sent him trained him well. He knows the punishment for failure is worse than anything we could do to him here." "Then we wait," Draven said. "Post 2 guards. I want him watched at all times." As they left the cell, Corwin fell into step beside him, glancing sideways at his alpha, with the kind of familiarity that came from years of loyal service. "You've been distracted tonight." "My pups were nearly taken," Draven said. "Forgive me if my mind isn't entirely on interrogation tactics." "That's not what I mean," Corwin said carefully, "and you know it isn't." Draven said nothing for a long moment, as they climbed the stairs back toward the main halls of the castle. The feast had long since ended, guests ushered home or to their guest chambers amid the chaos, the great hall now empty and eerily quiet compared to the celebration that had filled it only hours before. "I felt something," Draven admitted finally, the words feeling strange and heavy as he spoke them aloud for the first time. "In the nursery. When I got close to her." Corwin's steps slowed. "The bond. I didn't believe it would happen for me," Draven said. "I stopped expecting it years ago." "And now?" Draven exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, the weight of the night pressing down on him from every direction. "Now I don't know what to do with it. I have a Luna already. A pack that trusts the alliance she represents. And apparently, a mate I never noticed walking these halls for the past 2 years." Corwin was quiet for a moment, choosing his next words carefully. "The bond doesn't ask permission, Draven. It doesn't care about alliances or timing. If she is truly your mate, the pack will feel it eventually too, whether you acknowledge it or not." "I know," Draven said, and the certainty in his own voice surprised him. "I just don't know how to face what that means. Not tonight, with everything else falling apart around us." They walked the rest of the way in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, until they reached the healer's wing, where a soft light still glowed beneath one of the chamber doors. Draven paused outside it, torn between duty and the pull that had settled into his chest, and refused to loosen its grip. Inside, Ren sat propped against a stack of pillows, her side wrapped in clean linen, a cup of warm tea untouched on the small table beside her bed. She had not been able to sleep despite her exhaustion, her mind replaying the fight over and over, the fear in Nora's whisper, the strange, electric moment when the king had knelt beside her and looked at her as though seeing her clearly for the very first time. A soft knock sounded at the door, and she straightened, surprised to see Draven himself standing in the doorway rather than a servant or healer checking on her condition. "Your Grace," she said, attempting to rise despite the healer's earlier instructions to rest. "Don't," he said quickly, crossing the room to stop her with a gentle gesture. "Please, stay seated." He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, studying her for a long moment before speaking again. "How are you feeling?" "Better than I probably look," Ren said, a small, tired smile touching her lips. "The twins, are they all right?" "Sleeping now, finally, though Nora insisted on having her door left open," Draven said. "She kept asking if you were coming back to check on her, the way you always do." Something warm flickered across Ren's face at that, genuine affection breaking through her exhaustion. "They're good children, braver than they should have had to be tonight." "Because of you," Draven said. "If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't done what you did, I don't know what I would have found in that room." Ren shook her head, uncomfortable with the weight of his gratitude. "Anyone in my position would have done the same." "No," Draven said again, the same firm insistence from earlier returning to his voice. "I've had guards, trained warriors, stand frozen in less dangerous moments than the one you faced tonight. What you did wasn't ordinary. It wasn't simple duty. It came from somewhere deeper than that." Ren fell silent, unsure how to respond, unsettled by the intensity in his gaze, an intensity that felt different from anything she had experienced from him before, though she could not name exactly what had changed. "Can I ask you something?" Draven said after a moment. "Of course. Have you ever felt something you couldn't explain? Around me, I mean. Tonight, or before tonight?" The question caught her off guard, and heat rushed to her cheeks before she could stop it. She thought of the strange warmth that had spread through her chest earlier, the way the noise of the room had faded when their eyes met, the pull she had dismissed as exhaustion but which, if she was honest with herself, felt like something more. "I don't know what you mean," she said carefully, though her voice wavered just enough to suggest otherwise. Draven studied her a moment longer, and whatever he saw in her expression seemed to satisfy something in him, even as it complicated everything else. "Rest," he said finally, rising from the chair. "We'll talk more when you're stronger." He left before she could ask any of the questions now spinning through her own exhausted mind, and long after the door closed behind him, Ren lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what exactly had just happened between them, and why her heart had not yet slowed its unsteady, hopeful rhythm. Morning brought little rest and even less clarity, and by the time the sun rose fully over the castle, whispers of the previous night's attack had already spread through every corridor and kitchen. Servants spoke of it in hushed tones as they carried breakfast trays. Guards discussed it in low voices as shifts changed at the gates, and by mid-morning, the story had grown in the telling, though the truth needed no exaggeration to be remarkable. Ren sat in the small chamber she had been given, still sore but steadier than the night before, when a knock at her door revealed not a healer or servant, but Mira, one of the few people in the castle Ren had ever considered close to a friend. Mira worked in the kitchens, sharp-tongued and warm-hearted in equal measure, and she wasted no time crossing the room to pull Ren into a careful, gentle hug. "Everyone is talking about it," Mira said, pulling back to examine Ren's bruised jaw with a wince. "They're saying you fought off an intruder with nothing but a fire poker. Is it true?" "More or less," Ren admitted, managing a tired smile. "It felt less impressive while it was happening." "Less impressive?" Mira dropped into the chair beside the bed, eyes wide. "Ren, you saved the Alpha King's children. Do you understand what that means? People who never look twice in your direction are suddenly asking your name." Ren shifted uncomfortably at the attention, unused to being the subject of anyone's curiosity, let alone the entire castle's. "I don't want special attention. I just want to make sure Elias and Nora are safe." "That's exactly why you deserve the attention," Mira said gently. "You never wanted it. That's what makes it mean something." Before Ren could respond, a soft knock interrupted them, and a young servant appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. "The king is asking for you," she said. "He wants you to join him in the private garden, if you're able to walk." Mira raised an eyebrow at Ren, a knowing look crossing her face that made Ren's cheeks warm despite herself. "The garden. How romantic." "It's not like that," Ren said quickly, though she wasn't entirely certain that was true anymore. Not after the strange conversation from the night before, not after the way Draven had looked at her as though searching for something he had only just discovered existed. She dressed carefully, wincing as she pulled a simple gown over her bandaged ribs, and made her way slowly through the familiar corridors, toward the private garden reserved for the royal family, a place she had visited countless times before while minding the twins, but never once as a guest in her own right. Draven was already there when she arrived, standing near a stone bench beneath a canopy of blooming vines, his posture tense despite the peaceful setting around him. He turned as she approached, and something in his expression softened immediately at the sight of her, though concern quickly followed. "You shouldn't have walked so far in your condition," he said, moving to help her settle onto the bench. "I'm stronger than I look," Ren said, though she accepted his assistance gratefully, her side still tender from the previous night's fight. They sat in silence for a moment, the morning air cool and fragrant around them, before Draven finally spoke again. "I wanted to speak with you properly, away from guards and healers and Corwin's very unsubtle attempts to give us privacy." Despite herself, Ren laughed softly, the sound surprising them both. "That does sound like him." Draven smiled faintly, though the expression faded quickly, as more serious matters returned to his thoughts. "The prisoner still refuses to name whoever sent him, but we believe someone within the castle provided information about the feast, about when the wards would be weakest. I need you to be careful, Ren. Whoever orchestrated this attack knew exactly what they were targeting. You think they'll try again, Ren said, understanding settling heavily over her. I think we cannot rule it out, Draven admitted, which is why I want you close to the twins, permanently, if you're willing. Not simply as a caretaker among many, but as someone I trust completely with their safety. Ren's breath caught at the weight of the offer, at the responsibility and trust it carried. I would do anything to keep them safe. You know that already. I do, Draven said quietly. That's part of why this is so difficult to say. She turned to look at him fully, curiosity, and something else, something warmer, stirring in her chest at the uncertainty in his voice, so unlike the composed, commanding alpha she had known for the past 2 years. Say what? She asked softly. Draven was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the garden, as though gathering courage he did not often need to summon. Ren, when I found you in that nursery last night, when I got close enough to catch your scent for the first time, something happened. Something I have been trying to understand since without much success. Her heart began to pound, a slow, uncertain rhythm that seemed to match the tension building in the air between them. What kind of something? The bond, Draven said finally, the word landing between them with quiet, undeniable weight. The mate bond. I felt it the instant I was close to you. My wolf recognized you immediately, though I had walked past you countless times before without understanding what I was overlooking. Ren stared at him, certain she had misheard, certain the words could not possibly mean what she thought they meant. That isn't possible, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. You already have a mate, Luna Seraphine. Seraphine was chosen for me through alliance, not bond, Draven said carefully. I have never felt with her what I felt with you last night. Not once, in all the years we have been together. The revelation settled over Ren like a weight she was not prepared to carry, confusion and disbelief, and something dangerously close to hope tangling together inside her chest. Your Grace, I am a servant. This isn't something that happens to people like me. It happened, Draven said simply, whether either of us is prepared for it or not. Ren opened her mouth to respond, though no words came, her mind spinning too quickly to settle on anything coherent. Before she could find her voice, a shadow fell over them both, and they turned to find Seraphine standing at the entrance of the garden, her expression carefully composed, though her eyes carried an unmistakable, simmering intensity as she studied the careful distance between them, the tension neither of them had managed to fully hide. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important, Seraphine said, her voice smooth and cold in equal measure. Draven rose immediately, though guilt had no place in his expression, only a steady, unwavering resolve that unsettled Ren nearly as much as the confession he had just made. Seraphine, we need to talk. Yes, Seraphine said, her gaze flicking once more toward Ren, before settling firmly on her husband. I believe we do. Ren rose from the bench quickly, murmuring an excuse about checking on the twins, desperate to escape the sudden weight pressing down on the garden. Draven caught her hand gently before she could leave, a brief, steadying touch that lasted only a moment, but left warmth trailing along her skin long after she pulled away. She did not look back as she hurried from the garden, though she could feel Seraphine's gaze following her the entire way, sharp and unreadable. Inside the private sitting room adjoining the garden, Draven turned to face his Luna fully, bracing himself for a conversation he had known, on some level, was inevitable since the moment his wolf had recognized Ren's scent the night before. You've been avoiding me since the feast, Seraphine said, crossing her arms, and now I find you alone in the garden with a servant girl, speaking to her as though she were something more. She saved our children's lives, Draven said carefully. That earns her more consideration than most. That isn't what I saw, Seraphine said, her composure cracking just slightly at the edges. I saw the way you looked at her, the way you rose from that chair the instant she walked into the garden. I am not blind, Draven, whatever else I may be. Draven exhaled slowly, understanding there was no gentle way to deliver truth that had already begun reshaping the foundation of everything between them. I felt the bond, Seraphine. Last night, in the nursery. I did not seek it out. I did not want to complicate what exists between us, but it happened, and I cannot pretend it did not. Seraphine went very still, the color draining slightly from her face. The mate bond. Yes. With her. Yes, Draven said again, quieter this time, watching the impact of the truth settle over his wife's features. For a long moment, Seraphine said nothing at all, simply stared at him, as though trying to determine whether this was some cruel joke, some misunderstanding, that could still be corrected with the right words. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its earlier sharpness, replaced by something rawer, more vulnerable than Draven had heard from her in years. "We have been mated for 6 years," she said. "I gave you an heir, 2 in fact. I have stood beside you at every gathering, every negotiation, every moment this pack has needed a Luna to represent its strength. And now you tell me none of that mattered, because some servant girl happened to be standing in the right room at the right moment. That isn't fair," Draven said, though guilt tightened in his chest at the pain evident in her voice. "None of this diminishes what you've done for this pack. But the bond isn't something either of us can control or explain away because it's inconvenient." "Inconvenient," Seraphine repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her. "Is that what I am to you now? An inconvenience standing in the way of your destined mate? That isn't what I said." "The duent. It's what you meant," Seraphine snapped, her composure finally shattering entirely. "Do you have any idea what this will do to my standing? To our children's standing? The pack will not simply accept the Alpha King casting aside his Luna for a servant, no matter how heroic her actions last night may have been." Draven's jaw tightened, torn between sympathy for the woman who had shared his life for 6 years, and the undeniable, insistent pull toward the woman who had, without hesitation, put her own life on the line to protect his children. "I am not casting you aside without careful consideration, Seraphine, but I will not deny what the bond has shown me either. That would be a lie, to you, to Ren, and to myself." Seraphine's eyes filled with angry, unshed tears, and for a moment, Draven glimpsed something beneath her carefully polished exterior, a genuine fear of losing everything she had built her identity around. "What happens to me then? What happens to my place in this pack, in this family, if you choose her?" "Nothing has been decided," Draven said, though even as he spoke the words, some part of him understood they were not entirely true, that the bond had already begun deciding for him, in ways neither logic nor loyalty could easily undo. "I need time. We both do." "Time," Seraphine echoed hollowly. "As if time will change what your wolf already recognizes as truth." She turned and left the room without waiting for a response, her earlier composure gone, replaced by something far more fragile, and Draven remained standing alone amid the wreckage of a conversation he had known was coming, but had not been prepared to actually endure. Outside, in the corridor, Seraphine paused just long enough to compose herself, wiping carefully at her eyes before anyone could witness the crack in her armor. As she straightened, her gaze fell upon a familiar figure approaching from the opposite hallway, one of the castle's senior advisors, a man named Elric who had served the pack faithfully for decades, and who had, on more than one occasion, offered Seraphine quiet counsel during difficult moments. "Luna," Elric greeted, bowing slightly, though his sharp eyes quickly noted her distress. "Is something troubling you?" Seraphine hesitated only a moment, before deciding that pride mattered less, in this instance, than allies. "Walk with me, Elric. I find myself in need of guidance, and perhaps, in time, an ally who understands the importance of protecting what I have built here." Elric's expression sharpened with quiet interest as he fell into step beside her, and somewhere deep within Seraphine, a plan, still forming, still uncertain, began taking its first careful shape. If the bond could not be undone, perhaps the woman at its center could be dealt with in other ways entirely. 3 days passed before the prisoner finally broke his silence, and when he did, the truth he revealed sent a cold ripple through every corner of the castle. Corwin delivered the news to Draven personally, finding him in his study late in the evening, papers scattered across his desk, though his attention had clearly been elsewhere for most of the night. "He gave us a name," Corwin said without preamble, closing the door behind him. "The one who hired him. He claims it was someone inside our own walls who provided the details about the feast, the timing of the wards, the location of the nursery." Draven set down his quill slowly. "Who? He doesn't know the person's identity directly. Everything was arranged through intermediaries, coin exchanged through third parties, to keep whoever orchestrated this hidden. But he did mention one detail that concerns me." Corwin hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. He said the person who hired him seemed to have access to private castle schedules, information that isn't shared outside a small circle. The implication hung heavy in the room, and Draven felt a familiar unease settle into his chest, the same unease that had been building since Seraphine had stormed from their conversation in the garden 3 days earlier, her wounded pride and desperate need to protect her position simmering beneath every strained interaction they had shared since. "You think it was someone close to Seraphine," Draven said, though it was less a question than a reluctant acknowledgement of the direction his own thoughts had already drifted. "I don't want to accuse the Luna of anything without proof," Corwin said carefully. "But someone with access to that information exists within a very small circle, and Elric has been unusually present in her company these past few days." Draven rubbed a hand across his face, exhaustion pressing down on him from every direction. The bond with Ren had settled into his chest with undeniable permanence, growing stronger with every day that passed, every stolen conversation, every moment he found himself gravitating toward, wherever she happened to be in the castle. And now, layered atop that complicated truth, sat the very real possibility that his own Luna, wounded and desperate, might have played some role, however small, in the attack that had nearly cost him his children. "Keep watching," Draven said finally. Quietly, "I want proof before any accusations are made. If Seraphine is innocent, I will not destroy what remains of her dignity over suspicion alone. And if she isn't innocent?" Draven's expression hardened. "Then there will be no place for her in this pack, regardless of the years we've shared or the children we've raised together." Corwin nodded and left the study, leaving Draven alone, with thoughts that grew heavier by the hour. He found himself, as he so often did lately, drawn toward the nursery, where Ren had taken to spending most evenings with the twins, reading them stories, or simply sitting nearby as they drifted off to sleep, unwilling to let too much distance grow between herself and the children she had fought so hard to protect. He found her there now, curled in the window seat with a book open on her lap, though her eyes were fixed on the stars outside rather than the pages in front of her. She looked up as he entered, offering a soft, tired smile that did strange, wonderful things to the ache that had settled permanently in his chest since the night of the feast. "They're finally asleep," she said quietly, nodding toward the twins' beds. "Nora insisted on 3 stories tonight, instead of the usual 2. She's always been stubborn," Draven said, crossing the room to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Gets it from her mother, I suspect." Something flickered across Ren's expression at the mention of Seraphine, a careful hesitance that had grown more pronounced over the past few days, ever since word had quietly spread through the castle about the strange new tension between the king and his Luna. She had not asked him directly about it, unwilling to pry into matters that felt too large and too complicated for someone in her position to navigate, but the unspoken questions lingered between them regardless. "How are things?" she asked carefully, "between you and Luna Seraphine?" Draven exhaled slowly, weighing how much honesty to offer. Strained. She knows about the bond. She isn't ready to accept it, and I understand why, even if I cannot change what my wolf has already decided. "I never wanted to cause trouble between you," Ren said softly, guilt threading through her voice. "If I could undo whatever this is, whatever the bond means, I would, if it meant sparing everyone this pain." "Don't," Draven said, turning to face her fully, his expression fierce with a conviction that startled her. "Don't apologize for something neither of us chose or controlled. What happened between us wasn't your doing, Ren. It simply is what it is. But it complicates everything," Ren said. "Your marriage, the pack's stability, your children's future." "My children already love you," Draven said gently. "That complicates nothing. If anything, it simplifies what matters most." Ren fell silent, unsure how to respond to the quiet certainty in his voice, the way he looked at her, as though she were something precious and rare rather than simply the servant girl she had considered herself for the past 2 years. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and covered his hand with hers, a small gesture that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through both of them. "I'm frightened," she admitted quietly. "Not of the danger. I can face danger. But this, whatever is growing between us, feels bigger than anything I know how to prepare for." "I feel the same way," Draven said, turning his hand to lace his fingers through hers. "But I would rather face it with you than pretend it doesn't exist," simply because it's difficult. They sat together, in comfortable silence, for a long while after that, the twins sleeping peacefully nearby, the castle quiet around them, and for a brief, precious moment, the weight of politics and suspicion and wounded pride felt distant enough to ignore entirely. That peace shattered the following morning, when a servant rushed into the great hall during the pack's morning gathering, breathless and pale, clutching a folded piece of parchment in her trembling hands. "Your Grace," she gasped, bowing hastily before Draven's raised throne. "We found this hidden in the Luna's private chambers, during routine inspection following the attack. I believe it needs your immediate attention." Draven took the parchment slowly, unfolding it with a growing sense of dread, and as his eyes scanned the contents, the color drained from his face entirely. The letter, written in a careful, deliberate hand, detailed payment arrangements, dates, and specific instructions regarding the timing of the founding feast, information that could only have been provided by someone with intimate knowledge of the castle's inner workings. At the bottom of the letter, barely legible but unmistakable, was Seraphine's own signature. The great hall fell utterly silent as Draven lowered the parchment, his expression a careful mask hiding the storm of betrayal and disbelief raging beneath the surface. Every eye in the room turned toward the entrance, where Seraphine had just arrived for the morning gathering, entirely unaware of what awaited her. "Luna Seraphine," Draven said, his voice carrying an authority that silenced whatever pleasant greeting had been forming on her lips. "We need to speak, now." Seraphine's confident stride faltered the moment she saw the parchment in Draven's hand, her eyes widening with a flash of panic, before she quickly composed herself, forcing her expression back into something calmer, more controlled. But it was too late. The room had already witnessed the crack in her armor, and whispers began rippling through the gathered pack members like wind through dry grass. "Whatever that is," Seraphine said carefully, "I can explain." "Explain then," Draven said, his voice dangerously quiet as he held up the letter for her to see clearly. "Explain why a letter detailing the timing of the feast, the exact moments the wards would weaken, sits in your private chambers bearing your signature." Seraphine's gaze flicked around the hall, taking in the shocked faces of pack elders, guards, and servants who had gathered for the morning meeting, all of them now watching her with expressions ranging from disbelief to open suspicion. "This is a mistake," she said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. "Someone is trying to frame me." "Who would go through such trouble?" Draven asked. "And for what purpose?" "I don't know," Seraphine said, desperation creeping into her tone now. "But Draven, you cannot possibly believe I would endanger our own children. I carried them. I raised them alongside you for years." Draven studied her for a long moment, torn between the years of shared history that argued in her favor and the damning evidence held firmly in his hand. "Then tell me the truth, Seraphine, all of it, because right now, the evidence tells a story I do not want to believe, but cannot simply ignore." Seraphine's composure finally cracked entirely, tears filling her eyes as the weight of the situation closed in around her. "I never wanted them harmed," she said, her voice breaking. "I swear it on everything I hold sacred. But when I learned about the bond, when I understood what it meant for my place here, for my children's future, standing in this pack, I made a terrible decision out of fear." Gasps rippled through the hall, and Draven's expression hardened further, though beneath the anger, a deep sadness settled into his chest as well. "What decision, Seraphine?" "I hired someone," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper now, though it carried clearly through the silent hall. "Not to harm the children. Never that. I wanted them frightened enough that blame would fall on the servant girl, that her position watching them would be questioned, that she would be removed from the castle entirely before this bond could grow into something neither of us could undo." The hall erupted into stunned murmurs, and Draven felt something inside him go cold and still, a mixture of fury and heartbreak he had not expected to feel so intensely. "You endangered our children," he said slowly, "to protect your own position. You put Elias and Nora in real danger, Seraphine, danger that nearly cost them everything, all because of jealousy and fear." "I never imagined it would go so far," Seraphine said, tears streaming freely now. "The man I hired assured me it would be a controlled situation, frightening but harmless. I didn't know he intended to actually take them." "That does not absolve you," Draven said, his voice hardening, with a finality that left no room for negotiation. Whether the outcome matched your intentions or not, you set events into motion that nearly destroyed everything I hold dear. Our children could have died that night, Seraphine, because of choices you made. Seraphine sank to her knees, the weight of her actions finally crashing down upon her fully in front of the entire gathered pack. Please, she whispered, whatever punishment you decide, I understand. But please believe that I never intended for it to go this far. Draven turned to Corwin, who stood nearby, his expression grim but resolute. Take her to the private chambers under guard. She will remain there until the elders convene to determine appropriate consequences for her actions. This is no longer a matter I can decide alone. As guards moved to escort Seraphine from the hall, she cast one final desperate look toward Draven, searching for any trace of the years they had shared together, any flicker of mercy in his expression. She found only quiet, unshakable resolve, the look of a leader who understood that protecting his pack, and his children, mattered more than preserving a bond that had never truly been genuine in the first place. Word of what had happened spread through the castle within hours, reaching Wren as she sat with the twins in the garden, teaching Nora how to identify different flowers among the blooming vines. A servant approached hesitantly, delivering the news in careful, measured words, and Wren felt her stomach drop as the full weight of the revelation settled over her. She hired the attacker, Wren repeated numbly, glancing toward Elias and Nora, who continued playing nearby, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just upended their family. To frighten them, because of me. Because of the bond, the servant corrected gently, not because of anything you did wrong, Wren. You saved them. Whatever fear or jealousy drove the Luna's choices, none of that responsibility falls on you. Still, guilt pressed heavily on Wren's chest as she watched the twins, understanding now with painful clarity just how close her presence in their lives had come to costing them everything, however indirectly. When Draven finally found her later that evening, exhaustion and grief etched deeply into his features. She rose immediately to meet him, searching his face for some sign of how he was truly holding up beneath the weight of the day's devastating revelations. I'm so sorry, she said softly, before he could speak. If I had never come into your life, none of this would have happened. Don't, Draven said, echoing the same firm insistence from days before, though exhaustion roughened his voice now. This isn't your burden to carry, Wren. Seraphine made her choices. The consequences belong to her alone, not to you. And certainly not to the bond neither of us asked for, but both of us now carry. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, drawing comfort from the steady warmth of his touch, even amid the chaos surrounding them both. What happens now? She asked quietly. The elders will decide Seraphine's fate, Draven said, and once that is settled, I intend to do something I should have done the moment I understood what you are to me. Wren looked up at him, uncertainty and cautious hope mingling in her expression. What is that? Draven's gaze softened, though determination remained steady beneath the tenderness. Claim you properly, Wren, before this entire pack, as my true mate, and as the future Luna of this kingdom. The pack elders convened 3 days later in the Great Hall, their expressions somber as they listened to the full account of Seraphine's actions, the letter serving as undeniable proof of her involvement, though her tearful testimony of never intending true harm to the twins tempered the severity of their final judgment. In the end, exile was chosen over harsher punishment, a decision that allowed Seraphine to leave with her dignity partially intact, though she would never again hold standing within the pack she had once ruled beside Draven. She left the castle quietly, before dawn, without ceremony or farewell, her carriage disappearing down the long road that led away from the only home she had known for the past 6 years. Draven watched from a high window as it vanished into the morning mist, feeling not triumph, but a quiet, complicated sorrow for the years they had shared, and the trust that had ultimately crumbled beneath fear and desperation. Wren found him there afterward, standing alone with his thoughts, and she approached carefully, unsure whether he needed comfort or solitude in this particular moment. Are you all right? She asked softly. Draven turned to her, and though sadness lingered in his eyes, something steadier and more resolved had settled over him as well. I will be. It's strange, mourning something that was never truly what I believed it to be. But we shared years together, and children, and that history doesn't simply disappear because of how it ended. That's a kind way to think of it, Ren said quietly. Kindness costs little, Draven said, and holding on to anger accomplishes even less. I would rather move forward with clarity than bitterness. Word of Seraphine's exile spread quickly through the pack, and with it came renewed attention toward Ren, whose role in the twins' rescue and the king's unmistakable devotion had become the subject of endless speculation among servants and nobles alike. Some regarded her with newfound respect, others with quiet suspicion, uncertain how to categorize a servant girl who had somehow captured the heart of their alpha king. Mira found her in the kitchens one afternoon, sorting through the whispered opinions with characteristic bluntness. Half the castle thinks you're some kind of hero sent by the moon goddess herself, she said, grinning as she kneaded dough at the counter beside Ren. The other half thinks you schemed your way into the king's favor. Personally, I think they're both wrong, and you're just you, which has always been more than enough. Ren laughed softly, grateful for her friend's steady presence amid the whirlwind her life had become. I never wanted any of this attention, Mira. I only wanted to keep the twins safe. I know, Mira said, more gently now, and that's exactly why you deserve whatever happiness comes from it. Not everyone who reaches for power actually deserves it, but you never reached for anything. It found you instead. That evening, Draven requested Ren's presence in the Great Hall, and as she made her way through the familiar corridors, nerves fluttered in her stomach despite Mira's earlier reassurances. She had grown accustomed to quiet moments with Draven, stolen conversations in gardens and nurseries, but a formal summons to the Great Hall carried a different weight entirely. The hall was full when she arrived. Pack elders and guards and servants alike gathered beneath the high stone arches, their attention immediately turning toward her as she entered. Draven stood near his throne, dressed formally, his expression a careful balance of nervousness and unwavering resolve. Beside him, Elias and Nora waited eagerly, practically bouncing with excitement they had clearly been instructed to contain, though they failed rather adorably at the effort. Ren, Draven said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall as she approached. Thank you for coming. Of course, Your Grace, she said, though uncertainty colored her tone as she took in the gathered crowd, the formal atmosphere so different from their usual quiet exchanges. Draven stepped down from the raised platform, closing the distance between them until he stood directly before her, and the entire hall seemed to hold its breath collectively as he reached for her hands. I have spent the past several days reflecting on everything that has happened since the night of the founding feast. The danger you faced, the courage you showed, the bond that revealed itself to me in a moment I least expected it. Ren's heart pounded as every eye in the hall remained fixed upon them, though she found she could focus only on Draven, on the sincerity radiating from his every word. I have spoken with the pack elders, Draven continued, and while some hesitations remain regarding tradition and expectation, all agree on one undeniable truth. The bond between a true mate and their alpha cannot be denied or replaced by politics or convenience. It exists because the moon goddess herself deems it so. He knelt then, right there in the Great Hall, before the entire assembled pack, and produced a small, intricately carved pendant, the mark of Luna status passed down through generations of the pack's leadership. Ren, you protected my children when no one else could. You showed courage I have rarely witnessed, even among trained warriors. And in doing so, you revealed a truth about yourself that I believe this pack, and I, have been fortunate enough to discover. Tears gathered in Ren's eyes as she listened, overwhelmed by the weight and sincerity of the moment unfolding before her. I am asking you, Draven said, his voice steady, despite the vulnerability evident in his expression, to accept not only my bond, but my heart, fully and completely. Will you stand beside me as my true mate, and as Luna of this pack? The hall remained utterly silent, every gaze fixed upon Ren as she processed the enormity of the question before her, the life it promised, so different from the quiet, overlooked existence she had known for years within these very walls. Yes, she said finally, her voice thick with emotion, but unwavering. Yes, Draven, I accept. The hall erupted into cheers as Draven rose and placed the pendant carefully around her neck, sealing the moment with a promise neither of them intended to break. Elias and Nora rushed forward immediately, wrapping their arms around Ren's legs with delighted enthusiasm, and she knelt to embrace them both properly. laughter mixing with tears, as the weight of everything that had led to this moment finally settled into something joyful and complete. The following months brought changes to the castle that Wren could scarcely have imagined, during her years spent quietly tending to duties few others noticed or appreciated. She began learning the responsibilities of a Luna under the patient guidance of the pack elders, studying diplomacy, tradition, and the delicate balance of leadership that came with standing beside an alpha king. It was not always easy. Some pack members remained skeptical, uncertain how a former servant could truly carry the weight of Luna status, and Wren faced their doubts with the same quiet determination that had once carried her through a nursery filled with danger. Gideon, the man who had orchestrated the original attack alongside Seraphine's misguided involvement, was eventually captured attempting to flee across pack borders, having been identified through further investigation following Seraphine's exile. Justice was served swiftly and thoroughly, closing the final chapter on the danger that had once threatened everything Wren held dear. Elias and Nora flourished under Wren's continued care, their bond with her deepening naturally into something that felt, to all who witnessed it, entirely unforced and genuine. She read them stories each night, taught them small kindnesses that would shape their characters as future leaders, and loved them with a fierceness that required no blood relation to justify its depth. Draven watched all of it unfold with quiet wonder, marveling at how naturally Wren had settled into a role that others might have found overwhelming, how her genuine warmth and unwavering courage had won over even the most skeptical members of the pack over time. Mira remained a constant presence as well, promoted eventually to oversee the castle kitchens, though she never let her new status stop her from teasing Wren mercilessly about her unlikely rise from servant girl to Luna. On a warm evening nearly a year after the fateful founding feast that had changed everything, the pack gathered once more in the Great Hall, this time for a formal ceremony marking Wren's official investiture as Luna. The hall glowed with candlelight, filled with laughter and warmth, entirely different from the tension that had once hung heavy in these same stone halls. Draven stood beside her as the elders performed the ceremonial rites, binding their union formally before Pack and Moon alike, and as the final words were spoken, he turned to her with the same steady devotion that had defined every moment since that chaotic night in the nursery. "You once told me you didn't want special treatment," he murmured, quiet enough that only she could hear amid the surrounding celebration. "That you only did what anyone would have done." "I remember," Wren said, smiling softly up at him. "You were wrong," Draven said, his voice warm with affection. "What you did that night, and every day since, has been extraordinary. This pack is stronger because of you. My children are safer and happier because of you. And I am the luckiest alpha in generations, because the moon goddess saw fit to give me a mate as remarkable as you." Elias and Nora, now taller and more confident than the frightened children who had once huddled behind Wren in a wrecked nursery, rushed forward to join their parents at the center of the celebration, their joy infectious as the entire hall erupted into cheers and music. Wren looked out over the gathered pack, at faces that had once overlooked her entirely, now smiling and celebrating alongside her, and felt a peace settle into her chest that she had never known was possible. The girl who had once carried trays and minded children in quiet anonymity now stood as Luna, chosen not through politics or arrangement, but through courage, love, and a bond deeper than either of them had dared to imagine possible. As the celebration continued long into the night, Draven pulled her close for a dance beneath the same chandeliers that had once illuminated a feast where no one had noticed her absence, where her quiet courage had gone unseen by everyone, except two frightened children, and the fate that had been waiting, all along, to bring her into the light she had always deserved. "Not one step back," Draven whispered against her hair, echoing the words she had spoken to herself in the darkest moment of that fateful night. "You never stepped back from anything, Wren. Not from danger, not from doubt, and not from love." "Neither did you," Wren answered softly, resting her head against his chest as they moved together beneath the glow of 1,000 candles. "Neither did you." And in that moment, surrounded by the pack that had become her family, the children who had become her own, and the mate who had recognized her worth when the rest of the world had overlooked it entirely, Wren finally understood that she had never truly been ordinary at all. She had simply been waiting for the right moment to be seen,